The name is DrDark, and it is time to sit back and relax as we listen to this scary story. If you are new to my channel and love scary story narrations, then you have come to the right place. And all you have to do is subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications to never miss a future upload from me. Lastly, if you end up enjoying the story along the way, then do let me know by giving the video a like and sharing your thoughts on the story down in the comment section below. With this, it is time to gather around and settle down as the classes of DrDark are now in session. I'll try not to bore you with all the details of my personal life, but there's a bit of setup for this. I have a toxic family, hung out with crappy friends, and dated an abusive ex that led me to where I am now. Living in the middle of nowhere, rural New York was just suffocating. There wasn't a single good thing about where I come from, so I pulled together what little I had and escaped that hellhole. It was tough at first as I bounced between hostels the first few weeks I got here, but it felt like my life was changing for the better. My plans going forward are to work as much as possible, save as much money as I can, make some cool new friends, and eventually live in a nice place. I was lucky enough to land a waitress job at a nice restaurant, but it was almost across the city from where I stayed, so I had to commute on the busy subways to get to work. I am a tiny 24-year-old woman, and honestly, it's a bit nerve-wracking to be alone all the time. I just walked a bit faster and kept my head down if anything happened. After a few weeks of work, I was finally able to find a cheap apartment a few blocks away from the restaurant. The apartment building has definitely seen some things, but anything was better than living bunk to bunk with strangers. You would think my place would be massive with 8 floors within the weathered brick building, but when I reached my new home on 8B, I was faced with a space where everything from the bedroom to the kitchen was a few steps away. As I got settled into my apartment, I was able to convince myself that it was still better than being abused every day. I'd sometimes work late from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous going home at night. I've had a few instances where I had creeps on the street walk a bit too close to me, and a few of them even tried to follow me home. Thankfully, each time a cop or someone would be close by to intervene, but those are different stories for another time. This all happened one night after a particularly hectic shift at work. After cleaning up my section and clocking out for the night, I said goodbye to my co-workers as I went out into the cold night. My mind was completely blank and my body went into autopilot towards my apartment building. I'm not sure if it was because I was just spaced out or what, but I remember that night everything was eerily quiet. Before I knew it, I was already at the entrance of my building. The door was old and heavy, so I snapped back into reality to exert an extra bit of strength to get inside. The door groaned as I pulled it open, and I squeezed my body through. I was met with warm air, my cheeks tingling as my skin adjusted to the temperature. I stepped towards the elevator and pressed the button to call it down. I waited for a few minutes, and then a minute more, before pressing the button a couple of more times. The elevator didn't come down, and I cursed under my breath as I made my way towards the stairs. I was so exhausted, and the thought of going up all these stairs just to get to my apartment on the top floor was already torture. I was so ready to just crash onto my bed. That thought alone drove me to begin my climb up the stairs. I kept my head down, and with my hand on the rail, I began to go upwards towards my room. My footsteps made an echoing thud with each step I took. A few steps down and a million more to go. I made it up to the second floor on the stairwell, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I was hit with a pungent smell. It completely took me by surprise, and I was stopped in my tracks from gagging. I pressed my hand over my mouth and nose in a futile attempt to shield myself from the smell. Whatever it was, it smelled of something rotten, and it began to fill my mouth and lungs. I could almost taste the air, and my imagination made me think I was like licking decaying meat. I quickly pressed onwards to escape whatever was making that smell, and as I continued up the stairs, I realized that the sound of my footsteps weren't alone. With each step I took, I could hear a faint pit-pat sound of someone else's footsteps, coming from right below me. I pulled my head down over the railing, and I saw someone else slowly walking up the stairs as well. It was a woman wearing a sheer white nightgown. Her thin frame was visible through the fabric. She had her head down, raven hair flowing down with her arms laying down by her sides. She was walking up the stairs with a light pit-pat from her bare feet, pressing against each step. The woman looked like the girl from those Grudge movies, except that she was extremely tall. I am pretty short, just a bit taller than 5'4", but this woman had to have been at least 6 feet tall. Her body was hunched over, and her hair was covering her face, and as she got closer, the smell grew stronger. I've only seen a few people that lived in my apartment building, and I have never seen her before. In short, I was pretty unsettled, so I quickly made my way up towards the third floor. Faint pants began to escape my lips, only a few flights of stairs, and I was already getting tired. Then I heard the light pit-pat of the woman's footsteps again, except this time they were faster. I turned around, and before I knew it, I saw her tall frame hunched over behind me. That nauseating smell forced its way down my nose and throat. I was halfway up towards the fourth floor, and she was a couple of steps before the third. She was just a couple of feet away from me. Past my short breaths, I could hear her take deep, scratchy inhales with croaking exhales. I didn't know if it was just coincidence or not, but I quickly turned and bolted up the stairs. I shot past the fourth floor, and the noise behind me had suddenly increased in tempo. I was fully convinced now that this woman was following me. Enough was enough, so I started to run up the stairs. I zoomed past the fifth floor. My heart was racing, and each breath I took was burning cold in my chest. I couldn't slow down. That woman's footsteps were loud and echoed behind me. I swear her breath was right behind my head, with a warm mist hit my neck. That caused a chill to run down my spine. What's worse was that damn smell grew even stronger. The odor of decay. My mind began to race. I was nearing the sixth floor, and I wasn't sure if I should start banging on doors on that floor to get help, or attempt to make it to the safety of my apartment. What if they didn't answer the door? Would I even make it to my apartment? What if she ends up catching up to me? At that final thought, I stupidly turned around and I felt faint when I saw that she was indeed just a couple of steps behind me. And not only that, she was crawling up the stairs like some sort of animal, with her long pale limbs and hair black as shadow, covering her entire face. I let out a scream as I raced up the stairs even more. I hoped in my mind that someone would come out and save me, but as I made it onto the seventh floor, I realized there was no savior coming to my aid. I just had one more floor left, and my apartment was the first door on the right from the stairs. I prayed to myself, begging for enough strength to somehow make it to the door before whatever that thing made its way to me. That was when I made the mistake of jinxing myself. I felt my right leg falter as soon as I made it halfway up towards the 8th floor. My face began to crash towards the steps, but I was able to catch myself in time. I turned to see that the woman had caught up, and I could feel the blood drain from my face as my chest tightened at the sight of her. Her raspy breaths filled my ears, and she lifted one of her long, pale arms to reach towards me. She took a deep breath and let out a gravely string of words. "Come with me." Her long fingers slowly wrapped around my ankle and began to pull me towards her. No, stop! Stop! I screamed at the top of my lungs. I kicked as I turned up to grab the steps ahead of me in order to pull myself away from her grip. I was in a desperate struggle to escape, and as I continued to kick at her, I heard the snapping of bones. I was expecting a rush of pain to shoot up my body until I realized that the sound of breaking bones wasn't from me, but from her. The woman's grip loosened around my ankle, and I quickly crawled up to the stairs without turning back. I got up on my feet and ran to my apartment door, turning around to see if my attacker was behind me or not until I suddenly slammed into something that knocked me down. From the floor, I looked up and saw a familiar face of my ex-boyfriend looking down at me. An image all too familiar that caused a plethora of flashbacks to burst in my brain. I tried to lift myself up, but before I knew it, he had already grabbed my arms and yanked me up. I saw in his eyes so much anger, something else that I was familiar with. I winced at the pain from where he was squeezing me, and I begged for him to let me go. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, stuck between two monsters. He looked at me and scoffed. His voice boomed as he spoke. "Hey, do you know how long it took me to find you?" I felt so small now. Everything that I had worked so hard to escape was now right in front of me again. Please, I'm so sorry. Let me go, please. We have to get inside." I wailed. Like always, my words fell upon deaf ears. His gruff voice boomed again. "You and I are going back home, and you're going to stay where you belong." I tugged at my arm, but I couldn't move an inch within his grasp. With my free hand, I swiped it across his face. I could feel his skin tear under my fingernails. He turned his head and I saw my scratch marks had caused thin streaks of crimson. My little victory quickly turned to pure fear as he turned back to me with his face twisted in a pure rage. He lifted a fist and I just stood, closing my eyes to await the impact, until I heard him let out a gasp. His hand loosened on my arm and I heard him shout, What the hell is that?" I kept my eyes shut, but I knew what he was referring to. I could hear the pit-pats of the steps, of her steps. The deep raspy breaths echoing through the hallways, and the air filled with the smell of rot. I curled into a ball, awaiting one of the monsters to come and finish me. Instead, I heard my ex-boyfriend's footsteps thud away from me, followed by fast pitter-pattering of the women's towards him. I was on the floor next to the door of my apartment, cowering like a small child as I heard the thuds of impact. I looked to see the woman, so tall and thin, hovering over my ex and beating him senseless. Blood began to splatter with each blow to his face. Then I heard a door creak open. I turned towards the direction of the sound to see an old woman peeking through the cracks. Her face was pale as a sheet and filled with fear. A fear I had grown too familiar with tonight. I couldn't speak. The words just wouldn't come out. And all I could do was mouth out, "Help! Please help me." I saw her take a deep breath and open the door. She had a cell phone gripped in her hands. I already called the police. Her meek voice filled the hallway. We both looked down and saw my ex bloodied and beaten on the floor, with no sign of the woman in sight. The old woman and I were frozen in place for what felt like hours, until the police finally showed up from the elevator. My ex was beaten to near death by a mysterious assailant. The old woman and I described the tall woman to the police, but they were in disbelief. My ex was rushed to a hospital, and that was the last night I ever talked to him. A couple of days after that, I was filled with terror when I thought of going up the stairs. Luckily, the elevator worked without fail. Eventually, I went next door towards the old woman's apartment to finally thank her for helping me. When she opened the door, she looked at me with surprise, but invited me in for a cup of tea. We sat in silence for a moment, until I asked her if she knew who the woman was. She stared at me for a moment with her pale blue eyes and told me a story. A long time ago, when she was a little girl living in this building, there was a woman who lived with her husband somewhere in the apartment. She remembers that one day everyone was complaining about a smell coming from one of the rooms, and eventually the owner of the building had opened the apartment to find the tall woman, beaten by her husband with her corpse left to rot. The old woman recalled being just a little girl amongst the crowd of people, seeing the dead body being carted away. The smell was horrible. I finished my tea, thanked her again for her help, and went back to my apartment. When I reached my door, I stood there and just took a few minutes to take all the information in. I squeezed my eyes shut and I heard the pit-pats of the bare footsteps behind me. "Whoever you are, thank you," I whispered to the tall woman. I know that she must have been trying to help me. From the elevator to the stairwell, the tall woman was just trying to help me avoid a fate like hers. Thank you for tuning in to the classes of Dr. Dark. If you haven't done this already, do give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comment section below if you enjoyed the story along the way. If you are into such scary story narrations, then do not forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications on your way out. Do reach out to me on my social media handles and do tag me as well if you share this video with your friends. Lastly, if you enjoyed my style of storytelling and want me to narrate your own scary stories, then do send them to me via email or you can submit them on my subreddit. You will find all the details in the video description below. With this, until next time, class dismissed.